Hello and welcome to Hades. We're going to be doing something a little bit different this time. I am used to playing Hades on the Nintendo Switch. I just got it for Steam, and we're going to try this out. I am going to start by walking through what my basic setup is when playing through 32 Heat on Hades. I'm going to run through the Mirror of Night, I'm going to run through the Pact of Punishment, and I'm also going to run through some controller settings that I think are really important. So we're going to go into that, and then I'm going to upload a separate video right after that goes into the first of our 32 Heat series. So what we're going to be doing with this series is we're going to be clearing 32 Heat on Hades with every weapon and every aspect, and we're going to do some specialized runs. I've got a couple files here that I've been playing for too long. 1 second. Feels like some settings are a little off, so give me just a second. I'm going to fix this up. Okay, I think we're all good now. Yep, that feels a lot better. Okay, so what we're going to end up doing, I'm going to run through the Mirror of Night, I'm going to run through Keepsakes, I'm going to run through the Pact of Punishment, and we're just going to go through the overall basic settings that I use for almost every run. And I'm going to have this video as a resource, so that if you are curious about any of that stuff when you're going through any of the other videos I upload throughout this series, you can refer to this to see what my Mirror, Pact, and Keepsake settings are at. And then from there, we can just basically get right into the actual runs themselves. What I want to do with this series, though, is I want to clear 32 Heat on Hades with every single weapon, every single aspect, and a few challenge runs. So what that's going to mean is, first up, we're going to clear every single aspect, every single weapon at 32 Heat. But in addition to that, we're going to do some challenge runs in the sense of actually making use of the aspect's gimmick in a way that is maybe a little bit unconventional. So for example, Rama Bow. Most people that I see use Rama Bow just spam the special, which is an excellent way to use Rama Bow. Using especially Zeus with Rama Bow, Thunder Flourish, spamming special, probably the most effective way to use Rama. I see very few people actually use the shared suffering mechanic, and so we're going to do a shared suffering build. Gilgamesh. Fantastic weapon, probably my favorite fist weapon. We're going to make use of the dashing ability and the triple dash for that. We're going to make use of there's actually a dash only build that we're going to be doing with Gilgamesh. We may even start with that, seeing as we got Dark Thirst on there. Why not? Let's just go for it. But we're also going to do a maim build. Maim is oftentimes overlooked, but it's the thing that you can actually increase the damage of with Titan Blood. So we're going to lean into that gimmick. We're going to lean into that and see how can we make maim actually effective on 32 Heat. We're going to do that with every aspect. We're going to lean into not just the moveset and the playstyle of the weapon, but we're also going to lean into, okay, how can you make use of what Titan Blood actually increases? The Hellfire Blast damage for Lucifer. Stuff like that. But for starters, let's go into the Mirror of Night settings. There are a couple of settings that I use that I think are a little bit different than what a lot of players use. And the reason is that I am not a speedrunner. I don't speedrun games at all, unless I'm doing it as a joke, honestly. I think I've got a video on one of my other channels of really bad speedrunning of SM64. But I don't speedrun Hades. The way I play Hades is a way that I feel gives me the most control over my experience, but it's not the fastest, and it probably doesn't lead to the strongest runs. But what it does do is it gives me what I consider to be the most fun experience for me personally. If you agree with that, great. If you don't, that's fine. Play the way that you think is the most fun. Hades is a game. It's meant to be fun. The best way to play is the way that you find you get the most entertainment out of. So let's jump into the Mirror of Night, because this is a few things that I do a little bit differently. Normally, this here is the setup that I use. I use Shadow Presence, backstab damage I personally think is a little bit better than First Strike damage, but there are a few builds where Fiery Presence is useful. Dark Regeneration I typically prefer over Chthonic Vitality because of the boss chambers. You get bonus darkness at the end, especially when you've cleared all the bounties, and especially if you're doing darkness runs to get to that Unseen 1 rank. Dark Regeneration definitely helps. Death Defiance over Stubborn Defiance, I will almost never use Stubborn Defiance. I think the only time I'll ever use Stubborn Defiance is if I'm doing a Stubborn Roots build, which I never do, so Death Defiance right off the bat. Greater Reflex I will use 9 times out of 10. The only time I will not use Greater Reflex and use Ruthless Reflex is when I'm doing a Gilgamesh build. Or sometimes a Zegra's Fist build, but Gilgamesh is usually the one that I'll use Ruthless Reflex for. Other than that, usually the extra dash is just way too helpful for survival. Boiling Blood, again, dealing more damage to enemies with casts in them. Probably the only time I won't do that and I'll use Abyssal Blood is if I'm using something like... If there's builds where I don't actually use attack and special to deal bonus damage. If I'm focusing on things like calls or dashes, then maybe I'll use Abyssal Blood, but for the most part, Boiling Blood. I prefer Stygian Soul. I know a lot of people use Infernal Soul. I prefer Stygian Soul, and the reason why is unless I'm doing a specific cast build that requires me to have lots of casts, being able to recharge my cast means that I don't have to retrieve them. If I'm just using the casts to trigger Boiling Blood, and I'm getting that bonus 50% damage, then I'll just throw one cast, lodge it at an enemy, and then kill that enemy. I won't worry about going to pick up the cast that they drop. It'll recharge in 3 seconds. So I prefer Stygian Soul most times, unless I'm doing something like a Poseidon Sword build, or a Hera Bow build, things like that. Deep Pockets, that 100 obol right off the start is usually more beneficial, I find, than bonus 15% obol at the end of each round. Region, and mainly the reason for that is because usually I spend all my obol before I get to the end of the region, and that 100 obol off the bat is usually just a good way to go. Thick Skin over High Confidence, 50% bonus health, just increases that survivability. I'm gonna take damage. I'm not as skilled enough at this game to avoid damage, so I'm almost never going to be above 80% health. So Thick Skin, absolutely the way to go. Privileged Status. I see a lot of people prefer Family Favorite, where you get 5% bonus damage for each Olympian whose boons you have. I like to focus. There are a couple builds where I need 4 gods. Most of the time, I just need 1 or 2. And most of the time, I can find a way to apply 2 status effects, which gives me that 40% damage bonus, which is more than you can possibly get with Family Favorite, unless you're trying to get as many gods as possible. But Privileged Status I can usually get by the end of Tartarus, if I, get the right setup. So that 40% damage bonus for 2 status effects. There's especially some builds that make it insanely useful, and we'll be looking at a couple of those for sure. I definitely prefer Privileged Status. Dark Foresight, honestly, boons are great. Hammers are great. For me, it's palms. The option to get more palms in every potential chamber, boon rarity is great, don't get me wrong, but half the time I actually don't care what the rarity is. There's a couple times where I do, but most of the time that I do care about it, I don't actually need Olympian Favorite to get that rarity. There's things that you can do to kind of manipulate the rarity in a way where you can get exactly what you need every time. God's Legacy over God's Pride. Epic rarity boons are fantastic, and there are some builds that we'll be using God's Pride for, but primarily I prefer God's Legacy, because there's very few things that can actually increase your chance of getting Legendary or Duo boon. The God's Keepsakes are one of them. Yarn of Ariadne is another. I think the Nectar that you can get from Eurydice is another, but that's about it. God's Legacy is, in my perspective, kind of a more surefire way of getting the duos that you need, especially if a build hinges on them. And there's quite a few that do. But the big one, and the one that I want to talk about more, is Fated Authority. I almost entirely see the community using Fated Persuasion. There are some people I see using Fated Authority, but they're few and far between. I vastly prefer Fated Authority over Fated Persuasion. The ability to reroll a boon is fantastic, and that is especially useful for 2 things in particular, Hermes and Chaos. Because you cannot reroll a room to get an extra Hermes boon. Once you get 2, that's it. Except for in one situation, which I will also showcase. Chaos, on the other hand, you just can't reroll a room to give you Chaos no matter what, so Fated Persuasion is excellent for re-rolling Chaos and Hermes boons to get exactly what you want, but it is still not a guarantee. You only get 4, and if you re-roll it more than once, it costs you pretty much everything. Fated Authority, on the other hand, you get 8 of them, every time you re-roll a room only costs 1, even if you re-roll the same room multiple times. Fated Authority gives you an actual insight as to what a room could be if you take the Shrouded Chaos Curse, the one that conceals room rewards. You can actually tell if a room is something like one of your friends like Sisyphus. You can see if it's a Charon shop. It also allows you to re-roll mini-boss rooms, which are guaranteed to be boons, which means that you can basically get whatever boon you're going for as long as you have it in your pool. But the other added benefit to it, and this is one that I think is most important, is that Fated Authority is not used to help you get what you want. It is used to help you avoid the things that you explicitly do not want. That is why I like Fated Authority. And we'll go into a little bit more about why Fated Authority is so powerful in the next video here when we actually do a run. But this is my mirror settings. If there's a build that we do during the series that requires some changes, I will showcase what those changes are. But if I don't showcase those changes, these are the settings that I'm going to be using with the Mirror of Night for every run moving forward. There's very few times where I will actually change it. This is kind of my personal standardized Mirror of Night. So, let's go into keepsakes. I will rarely choose one of the God's keepsakes unless it is something that I can predict ahead of time. And I'll kind of explain what I mean in a second here. But the keepsakes are flexible based on the build. So I'm not going to go too much into which keepsakes I prefer to use specifically, but I do want to talk about Chthonic Companions. Most often than not, I see Megara, which is arguably the most powerful, consistent, reliable, high damage dealing companion. I personally prefer Shady. I like calling down Sisyphus and Boldy. And the reason why is because it is the only possible method in the game of summoning in supplies and getting an instant heal if you need one. It also potentially can give you a little bit of extra bonus obel or darkness if you need that for, like, say there's a shop coming up ahead and you're just shy of being able to afford a boon. Shady can help you close that gap. The damage output is not outstanding, and it can be a little bit tricky to use, but once you get the hang of it, I use Shady more than anything else. It is my favorite keepsake by far. Don't get me wrong, all of them have their kind of benefits, except for maybe Rib, but they all kind of have their own strengths and weaknesses. Megara is arguably the best for sheer damage output and reliability, but I gotta say, Shady's where it's at. That's my favorite. So we're going to be using Shady for pretty much all the runs moving forward. I actually have yet to find a reason to change that. Again, I'm not a speedrunner, so that's partly why as well. And last thing, let's talk about the Pact of Punishment. So, Pact of Punishment, this is, with maybe a few minor exceptions, what I'll be using the Pact of Punishment for at 32 heat. I like Hard Labor, 2 points into that. I've been playing on Hell mode for a while, so Hard Labor with 1 point in is pretty standard for me already anyway, so an extra point isn't really that big a deal. And yeah, if you're taking a lot of hits, you maybe don't want to do Hard Labor. If you're trying to improve your reflexes and improve your ability to dodge, then yeah, maybe Hard Labor is not the best way to go. But if you're at a skill level where you can actually do those dodges pretty... Oh, what just happened? Oh, my controller disconnected for a second. I think we're good. Yeah, if you're still learning how to, dodge effectively and all that stuff, and you don't quite have the reflexes or the skill level to be able to avoid damage most of the time, Hard Labor might not be the right choice. For me, I'm at a skill level where, yeah, I can I understand enemy attack patterns and I can avoid them more often than not, so I'm able to take a couple extra hits and not have it hurt the run too bad. Hard Labor is where I go. Lasting Consequences, I only like putting 1 point into this. 1 point's not so bad. More than that, I do rely on healing quite a bit, especially with Shady. That is also why I use Shady, is because I can heal at least 5 times per run. And it's not an amazing amount, but it's oftentimes enough to help me survive a run. So turning on Lasting Consequences too high can be a little bit dangerous, but 1 point's not so bad. Convenience fee. Once you get used to boons costing 270 obol at the shops, you start to prepare for it ahead of time, and it doesn't end up being so bad. If it's, if you're used to playing it where boons only cost 150, convenience fee can blindside you a bit. But if you get used to the higher prices, you don't even really think about it. Jury summons I like turning up by 1 point, but not more than that, and I'll tell you why. Just 1 second here. I don't like turning jury summons up too high because it doesn't actually feel like it's 20% more foes per rank. It almost feels like it's more like 20% more waves. And maybe I'm misreading that, maybe it's misinterpreting that, but that's how it feels to me as the player. Oftentimes, I'll think like, oh, okay, I'm facing 5 enemies, 20% more means I'll face 6. And then it's like, well, no, now it feels like I'm facing, instead of 2 waves of 5 enemies, I'm facing 3 waves of 5 enemies. Well, that's not 20% more, that's 50% more. And the more I turn this up, the more painful that feels. So I guess 2 points into jury summons is what I've got here. But that's like, I don't like maxing it out because that extra 20% just feels a little bit suffocating sometimes, especially when you've got tight deadline on. The more enemies you face there, the tougher it can be. Now, I personally like turning extreme measures all the way up. And the reason for that is because I like a challenge. I like being able to do a build that is so powerful that it can take on extremist measures Hades with calisthenics program all the way up. Like his health maxed out, him at his full strength, except for like 1 extra point, 3 less points, I guess, to hard labor. I don't like doubling his attack power, but calisthenics program with extreme measures, I just like a challenge. That's all there is to that. Benefits package, same thing. Like once you get used to the perks, it's not too tough to navigate. Some of them, if they combine, can be really, really deadly, but that rarely happens. The things that I find typically the most deadly are the haste one, where enemies move and attack faster. That combined with the cloning one, where they spawn little like 1 health clones of themselves, that can be pretty deadly, and that is definitely something you want to be cautious of. But other than that, for the most part, 1 point into benefits package is fairly easy. 2 points is just hope you don't get a bad loadout, but for the most part, you usually won't. Middle management, mini-boss encounters changing, that doesn't, I actually find, make them any harder. It just makes them a little bit different. So, it's an easy 2 heat. Underworld Customs, I used to do this one a lot, but I found that it would screw me over too many times, and I have since turned it off. I put the extra point into hard labor, and I think convenience fee is what I did for that. Forced overtime, I like 1 point into it. I do not like 2. 1 point is easy 3 heat. 2 points is a little tough for me to dodge at my current skill level. I personally don't like heightened security. 400% bonus trap damage for only 1 point of heat is not worth it to me. Routine inspection, I never want to disable the Mirror of Night personally. Damage control I will sometimes turn on depending on the build. If I'm doing like a Chiron bow build, that's an easy 2 heat. Approval process, again, has screwed me over too many times. It will oftentimes block out the exact boon that I'm going for. Tight deadline, once you get quick enough, 7-minute deadline per region is pretty easy to manage. So that's it. That's basically my Pact of Punishment settings. That's my Mirror of Night settings. Those are the... Why can't I move? Okay, something's going on. Give me 1 second. I think we're good. Yes, something happened with my controller. Give me 1 more second here. Okay, yeah, we're good. Something went wrong with my controller. I just disconnected or something. That's another thing. I am playing on PC, but I do play with a controller, and that's basically because that's what I've been doing for the last 1.5 years on a Nintendo Switch, and I'm just used to it. I can't do keyboard and mouse. I can't. I'm sorry. Okay, so we are going to go into, with that actually, we're going to go into one last thing, and that is controls. I have shifted some controls on my controller because I do find it significantly helps with a couple different ways of playing. One of them, I have switched the interact and the cast buttons. So cast is actually on my right bumper, and the reason for that is because if there are builds where I need to dash, attack, and cast all in quick succession, that's kind of tough to move the thumbstick, move my thumb around for that kind of stuff, and especially for things like Hera or Beowulf Bow. If I'm charging up an attack and I need to load up a cast, I need to kind of weirdly shift my index finger over to the cast to do that, whereas if it's on the bumper, I can load it while I'm charging up the attack, and it's good to go. So putting cast on right bumper and then putting interact on the A button, I personally find that to be a much more smooth and efficient way of play. But there is one other thing that I have shifted, and that is the reload button with the codex button. So this only comes into play especially if I'm using Hestia, but clicking the right stick to reload every single time is, especially if I'm trying to move around, if I'm trying to attack and I'm having to shift my thumb from the right stick to the attack button, it gets exhausting, honestly. Hestia was my least favorite aspect of all aspects of every weapon until I made that switch. Now I have reload on my left bumper, and I've got the codex on the right stick. The number of times I access the codex is not, like, it's fairly often, but if I'm doing a Hestia run, the number of times I reload as compared to the number of times I access the codex is extremely small. And accessing the codex is not something that usually you are under a pressure-sensitive situation like facing enemies for. So putting it on a little bit more of an uncomfortable control, like clicking the right stick, is a lot easier, and then having reload on left bumper makes for Hestia runs significantly easier. So that's it. That's my controls. This is actually how I have it set up right now. Everything else is the same. I don't have anything else changed. The only thing is cast and interact are switched, and then open codex and reload are switched. That's it. So that's it. That's my settings for what I choose to do to play Hades at 32 heat. This video I'm going to kind of leave up. I'm going to put it in the description of future runs so that if anybody wants to check what settings I use, they can reference this. And if there is something that comes up that changes any of those settings, I will highlight that in that particular video. But yeah, that's it for what I do for settings. And I will catch you in the next video. So have a good one. Peace.